Well, as people enter the room and kind of get themselves Zoom centered here, welcome. This is the penultimate session for the Wasatch Transportation Academy. I always relish the opportunity to use that word, penultimate. I mean, what a great work. Penumbra is another one. It's also a great word. Of course, planners are great at bringing in jargon. While people are still coming in, I'll tell the story. Once my wife was asking me about something that was happening on campus and whether, you know, how I was going to get up there. I said, well, it's usually a 5-minute walk, but I have to go perpendicular to the contour. And she looked at me and she said, do you mean uphill? Is that what you mean in English, is uphill? No, it's perpendicular to the contour. Well, welcome. I think I've vamped long enough. We are here for our second to last session of the Wasatch Transportation Academy. And we're delighted to see you all here, as we do every week. Last week, as you know, we had some fantastic presentations, some fantastic sessions, great projects. It was so inspiring. And thank you to everyone that presented last week. It was just really cool. And this week is also cool. So our agenda for the sessions, we've got 8 projects, and then we'll do 4 projects, have a break, and then do 4 projects. We'll start, I didn't do this last week, so I'm trying to make up for bad behavior, to tell you what the order is so you know when it's your turn, rather than just kind of jumping you with it. Oh, it's your turn, go. That isn't nice. So the order for this session is we're going to start with Christy, and then Vishali, and then Olivia, and Lucas, and then we'll take a break. And then after the break, we'll do Alec, and Anna, and Brian, and then Austin. And I see I just got an extra set of slides from Paolo and the Glendale group. And so we want to include them. And so we'll kind of put them on at the end as kind of a caboose. And I think that'll be a nice closer. So I'm glad you guys got some stuff in. We'll make it work. I want to talk about next week for a second here. Next week is our ultimate session, right? For the WTA. It is our field trip. After 7 weeks of meeting each other in our respective living rooms, studies, bedrooms, wherever you happen to be. Christy is at Delicate Arch, and isn't she lucky? I don't know how she pulls that off every week, but it's really impressive. Next week, we're going to be in person, actually live. And thank you to Julianne and to Salt Lake City for hosting this field trip. This is a fantastic thing that Julianne's pulled together. We're going to meet at 5:30, not 6, because we want to get enough daylight. And our meeting place is going to be, now catch this, on the east side steps to City Hall. So we know where City Hall is, right? And you might be thinking, well, since we're doing live on state, we would meet on the west side. But I'm concerned about traffic noise because it's pretty considerable at that time of day in particular. So let's meet on the east side steps. We'll be outside. And so the east side steps, those are the ones that face the library, right? So we're going to meet there at 5:30 and have some introduction to the project and some discussion and kind of a presentation a little bit on some of the ideas behind the project and some of the trade-offs, and we'll probably have a little Q&A. And then we don't want to spend too much time there because we want to get on site. And so we'll progress from there and walk down State Street and go to the site. And there are a couple of pull-out places, tuck-away spaces, as Julianne calls them, where I think we can tuck away off the street a little bit, pull back, where we can hear each other, because again, it's going to be pretty loud. But we're going to try to pull away from the street in a couple of locations and have some further discussions. So that's the plan next week. Any questions about all of that before we move on? This is not your last opportunity to ask questions, of course. So by all means, if they come up later or in tonight's class, then ask them or send me an email or put something on the chat. Before we get into tonight's presentations, I have a couple of thank yous to offer up, since this is our last kind of official session, or at least in this setting. I want to first thank Matt, Ryan, and Nathan McNeil, my partners on this project. This project is a group effort, and we've all been working really hard to bring this about. And these guys really are doing all the work. All I do is I show up and I try to smile and look pretty. But the real workers on this project are Nathan and Matt, and I sure appreciate you for all that you've done to make this a reality. Our sponsors, the National Institute for Transportation and Communities, better known as NITSE, at Portland State University, provided the grant to get this thing kicked off. And then we had in-kind contributions from a whole host of acronyms, UTA and Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City and the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget and UDOT and the Wasatch Regional Council. And they all made contributions of their time and expertise to the project and to the class, and I'm grateful to all of them. All right, so we're ready to get started. Before we do, the last thing is I want to introduce you to the panel that will be responding to the projects tonight. So GJ Labonte from UTA, you know from his presentation a couple of weeks ago, and Tom Millar, you also know from the city, from his presentation a couple of weeks ago. Someone that maybe you don't know is Councilmember Anna Valdemoras from Salt Lake City District 4. Councilmember Valdemoras is a graduate of the University of Utah from the Department of City and Metropolitan Planning. She is a planner. She came through our program just a year or two ago and became a planner for Salt Lake City, and then a planner for NeighborWorks, which is a nonprofit working on housing and justice issues on the West Side, and is an entrepreneur. You may have had some of her fantastic empanadas that she distributes from her location on 2nd East. But she's also is the brains and actually the muscle behind something called Square Kitchen, which is a shared institutional kitchen for food carts and food truck vendors that ply our streets and bring us excellent food. So Councilmember Valdemoras, it's fantastic to have you with us tonight, and we are especially pleased to have you join us. So let's just jump in right away. So I have, thank you for submitting slides in advance, and I have created a couple of different slide stacks. Some of these files were quite large because you took my suggestion to heart. You put videos into these presentations, and they're great. It's fantastic, and it makes the file sizes large. So I have a couple of different stacks going here, but I will get Christie's up and running. And that should be it. So Christy, can you take us away?
Yes, so Ms. May, just tell you next slide then, since you're in control. When I'm ready. I wasn't ready.
Oh.
Go back.
Oh, when you were ready. I got it.
Right. Okay, so yes, you answered my question. Okay, well, it's great to be here. My name is Christy Allen. I work for Utah Transit Authority in the Coordinated Mobility Department. I do partnership projects with human service transportation providers across the Wasatch Front and also statewide occasionally. I'm also the chairperson for the State Board of Aging and Adult Protective Services. Has a lot to do with the things I do. Most of the projects we focus on and that I focus on have to do with aging adults or persons with disabilities and or both, and veterans and low-income individuals. So this particular presentation is in preparation for a funding act ask I'm going to make later in the year. So we'll just begin with it is for a statewide volunteer driver electronic voucher program for aging adults and people with disabilities. Next slide. So pretty self-explanatory. Many people cannot access basic life-sustaining goods and services like medical appointments, grocery stores. They might need social services, go to church, things like that, due to lack of affordable and accessible transportation. Particularly, I would emphasize the accessible transportation, and we are coming up with some solutions for that too. But affordable, especially now, is really a concern always. Most of the time, our aging adults and persons with disabilities that need transportation services typically are low income by a large margin. Next slide. So the situation is we have adults age 65 and plus with no access to vehicles. This is this particular is more towards the Wasatch front. This is not a statewide number yet because we have not done a statewide study, but we will be doing a statewide study. But at least on the Wasatch front, we have 32,000 seniors that we have identified with no vehicle of their own. We have estimated 9,326 that are homebound. Assisted trips are really expensive, so especially things that might need accessibility. And that doesn't necessarily mean somebody who needs a mobility device like a wheelchair. These could be also people maybe with a cane or a walking device or something like that. But still, the cost of those kind of that kind of transportation is very expensive. It ranges from $25 to $45 a trip in the urbanized areas. When you get into rural areas, it costs much more. And then we have some issues with availability right now. So a lot of our human service transportation providers, for instance, if it's something like Davis County Aging Services, they only provide trips within Davis County. So if they have a client that needs to go to, say, the Veterans Hospital, they can't provide that transportation because they can't cross the county line. Also, they're limited to their time. They use some paid and some volunteer drivers. They only do service until 4 p.m. Then also their specific trips are only for medical, and their funding is limited. It comes from the federal government as well through aging funds. And so they have to limit who they can give transportation to. Next slide. So the solution, well, what we're presenting at least today for a short-term solution is fund a statewide volunteer driver program based on an established demonstration projects using the e-voucher software for electronic payment processing. And so what this is meaning is we have done some demonstration projects with paper vouchers, particularly in northern, well, we did a statewide project, and we also have been doing an ongoing project in Davis and Weber counties, and they work really well, and they're a great low-cost option. What happens is an individual goes to, say, for instance, again, Davis County Aging, and that particular human service transportation provider approves a client. That client is given vouchers. Those vouchers, then that client can go and find a neighbor or a relative, somebody to take them and drive them, say, to a medical appointment. It can be to food. It could even be to, to get their hair done. It's up to the agency if they put limits on what those trips can be, but it's pretty basic, pretty simple. The ride is provided. The driver who has provided the ride fills out the voucher. The voucher is sent into UTA, and we process that voucher for payment. But that's a pretty cumbersome process, and it's pretty costly on the administrative side to process those vouchers. So UTA, we put in some grant money. Yeah, sorry, I'm explaining a lot on this one. We received over $1 million worth of FTA grant funds from 2 separate grant requests to develop an e-voucher software. So because there was nothing existing in the market, we did explore that, but there was nothing existing. So we've been developing a software platform that will process these payments electronically, a lot like how somebody driving for Uber might have their payment process. So it's instantaneous, and the volunteer gets paid quickly, and that payment doesn't have to be processed anymore physically through someplace like UTA and through the bank account and all those things. Just so that you have the background and familiarity of what this project is. Next. So just for some supportive data, we have the average trip cost for a human service transportation provider in an urbanized area is about $30 a trip. That's a one-way trip, by the way. So it's pretty costly. But if with the data we have from over the years of doing this project, the average voucher trip in an urbanized area only costs $9. And so that's considerable. And a lot of times that's $9 for a round trip. So it's a lot of savings now, and it does a couple of things, because what happens now is this person is getting a cost-effective ride. Somebody else in the community is helping him. It helps with volunteerism, but that human service transportation provider now also has freed up a seat for maybe somebody who couldn't get a ride any other way, right? So we're making more seats available. We have a lower cost option for people. So it's a really smart and effective way to use taxpayer dollars, right? So rural trips average cost for human service transportation provider is $60. And we can get most of those trips down to about $30. So again, I mean, you're covering long distances, right? Say you're coming from Richfield to go all the way to Utah County for a medical appointment. So those are the kinds of trips we're looking at, and it really saves a lot of money. Next.
So Christy, I know this
Yes.
sounds amazing, but we're at 5 minutes. So.
Oh, sorry, I didn't even know we had a time limit with all these people. Well, I can whip right through this. We don't even have to look at this. This is just background. Next. I have to look at that one. So your results is just your volunteer driver voucher program. It's your lowest cost option. It helps with processing and the administrative costs. There was no off-the-shelf software. We've developed the software, and it will also track the trips so that we know that the trips are being made and there's not fraud going on in the program. Next. So our ask really quick would be $100,000 to pilot this program throughout 5 AOGs throughout the state in the rural areas to show sort of proof of concept. $20,000 would go to each AOG, and the UTA Coordinated Mobility Department would manage these funds as a pass-through and monitor the program and keep the data. Next. And the goals is just to get more rides, do a demonstration statewide, capitalize on previous federal investments that we've been doing. It's based on existing demonstration products. It will cut voucher administrative costs, and it will track the trips and keep all that data for us more smoothly. And I think that's it. Oh, there's also more benefits, but we don't need to see all those. Thank you. I really tried to support my argument. So any questions?
Excellent. You did very well. Bravo. So Councilmember Valdemoros, let's start off with you. What are your reactions? What advice could you give to Christy for moving this idea forward?
I think it's a great idea. I think it's needed. I didn't realize how expensive this was. This is really eye-opening. I think for any elected official that you're going to ask for funding, this realistic numbers like day to day, like, you know, these are like numbers that you like, you know, if you're not in that situation, you don't realize what it costs. I think, you know, I think a question that like a council member, like, or anybody for funding is, how do you like the more specific, like the logistics, maybe it's just me that always, like, if I was in that situation that I needed this transportation, like what are the steps so that I could explain it to a constituent that actually needs like this service? Could be like, okay, this is how you do it. Because right now I understand there's a software, and I understand there's this possibility of somebody taking me somewhere, but I don't know how. Where do I start?
Gotcha. So let's say I received the funding, and Salt Lake County Aging is one of the partners on this project. So you could tell a constituent and say, if you go to Salt Lake County Aging, they will qualify you for a voucher program. And then they will give you, once you're qualified, you will be qualified for a certain amount of money, and it'll be done electronically. They'll give you the instructions on how to do that. And then you can have a neighbor or friend or relative take you on your trips and get a reimbursement for that trip for some of that cost. And it will give you more ability to take trips when you need them and to the appointments that you need to get to. It's more flexible, and it'll probably help you have the ability to ask people and not feel, you know, and have people feel obligated and feel like everybody sort of wins in this scenario.
That's great.
Does that sound like
Yeah,
a good
that's
direction?
perfect. Yeah,
Okay.
that's really good. Like I was like, how do I use this if I have to? So this is great. So I think that's all. I think it's a great idea, and I think if I was the one making the decision, I would be like, yes,
Oh, thank you.
do it, go for it. Here's the money.
So I'm going to move us to the next presentation, and we can maybe catch up later on if time is available, but I want to make sure we have time for everyone. So I'm going to move us to Vaishali, who is going to bring a very different project. This one is much more engineering based, and I'll let her explain what the project's about. Vaishali.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name is Vaishali Apte, and I'm going to talk about roadway striping and visibility. I'm a relatively new resident of Utah. I moved here last June from Florida. And obviously, there's a lot of differences between Utah and Florida. And one issue that I noticed driving around here is whenever there's any kind of wet weather, precipitation, the pavement markings and the lane striping becomes very difficult to see. And obviously there's different technologies used in different parts of the country. And I wanted to kind of research why this was so difficult here and what some of the issues were. Next slide, please. So the area that I was focusing on for my project is actually a construction zone. It's a UDOT project on Interstate 80 and the Belt Route 215. It's the Sugar House area and near Olympic Cove and East Mill Creek. Next slide, please. And actually, if you can, there you go. So this is a video of what it looks like. This is actually driving during the daytime. You can see there's a lot of reflection. It's hard to see the pavement and the stripes, and you can also see the differences in colors from the different types of pavements that are there in the construction zone, the seams, which are causing some confusing textural issues, and just generally it's difficult to see when there's weather. This video is taken around noon, but obviously during morning rush hour, evening rush hour, when it's darker, it's a lot harder to see. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick summary of some of the important factors that's sort of making this dangerous. Speeding in the construction zone. There's a lot of signage that the construction zone is 55 miles per hour, but drivers are traveling much faster than that. There's insufficient lighting. There's a lot of, there's really no lighting on the main line. It's mostly just at the ramps. And so, we talked about the geometry of the road, the darkness, the fact that there's no reflectors, because obviously reflectors which are used in places like Florida would just get scraped off by snowplows. And also, I think that this particular area, and I've only been here for part of one winter, I guess, is that this bench area seems like it's a transition area between rain to snow, and it's just very hazardous. Next slide, please. And so what are some of the things that make it worse in this construction zone? So, like I said, the surface of the pavement is uneven. There's areas where there's asphalt and concrete, and they're kind of going diagonally across the lanes. The seams are going across the lanes, and so it becomes very confusing. The striping itself can be very faded in places, and in some places the lanes are very narrow through, for example, under the underpasses and the bridges, and then in other areas they're really wide. So it's really hard to tell if you're staying where you're supposed to be staying, and with people speeding through, it makes it even more treacherous. Next slide, please. And this is just a photograph. that actually my son took from the backseat of the car. This kind of shows you that it's blinding with the reflection. It's very difficult to see anything. This is over there by exit 4 on Belt Route 215. Next slide, please. And another example. Next slide, please. All right, so why is this such a big safety problem? And so just a couple of weeks ago, there was a pretty major crash, lanes were closed. And this area, I mean, obviously it's dangerous for drivers if there's a crash, but it was, you know, it's right next to where a lot of workers are in the construction zone. So that's extremely dangerous. There's just a concrete barrier separating them from the moving traffic. The other thing is, I think a lot of cars, my car doesn't do this, but I think a lot of cars are starting to use lane sensing technology. I don't know how they're able to sense the lanes when you can't even see them. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about future technologies for autonomous vehicles. And if they can't detect where they are, that's not going to work. Next slide, please.
So we're about 5 minutes now, Vaishali.
Oh, okay. All right. I will hurry up. So this project does have a public engagement website. It's a UDOT project. That's the website for it. And there is a contractor. So those are the agencies involved. They did, when I called the hotline, they did actually, about a week afterwards, they refreshed some of the paint. So that's good news. Next slide, please. These are just some different types of technologies, tapes, reflectors, different types of beads that are used. We can go past, you can go to the next slide. And there is a study that's underway, that a 3-year study that UDOT has started last year, where they're looking at the different types of striping. The I-80 and 215 project is scheduled to be completed at late 2023. And so this study won't be done by then, but I strongly suggest that they use whatever early results they have and go ahead and implement them instead of just waiting for the study, because then by then the construction will be done, it'll be too late. Next slide, please. So just to summarize the solutions, more frequent refreshes and touch-ups using the best possible technology for the final striping, increasing lighting across the whole roadway, not just the ramps, maybe putting in more temporary lighting, and also some better speed enforcement. And those are my suggestions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Very different project. This is one of the great things about these projects, is the diversity of ideas. So GJ, I know you have at least an engineering background. Do you have some thoughts about this particular project you can share with us?
I do. The texture, which I assume by that you mean the profile of the roadway when it's under construction, right? And then it grabs kind of the inside of your tire, and it kind of startles drivers. It's key to, especially if you're an insecure driver or a new driver, and then you got people coming at way beyond the construction zone speed limit. I think that's a key part of this. The autonomous vehicle suggestion, that everybody seems to think that's the solution for the world, you know, the Elon Musks of the world. But yeah, there's never a roadway that's not under construction at some point. And so if the autonomous vehicles technology doesn't take advantage of that, it's worthless, the automated drivers. And my last one was, do you know anything about how effective the fines are doubled for speeding in construction zones?
Yeah, there's signage that says fines are doubled, and I drive this route back and forth twice a day because I drop my son off over there and for school, and everybody is speeding, and I have never seen anybody getting pulled over. I saw somebody pulled over once, but they were starting to get basically the highway patrol person started following them on I-15. It was way before even getting onto the construction zone. So I have never seen anybody.
That's my experience, and only anecdotally. I have no data or anything to back this up that they determine that pulling people over in these zones is worse or a detriment to general traffic flow through, so they don't like to do that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm I'm thinking they've learned some pretty creative places to hide behind underpasses and, and things like that.
Yeah.
Why couldn't they just enforce these speeding zones a little bit more? But that's
Yeah.
all I got, Keith.
Well, thank you, GJ. Our next presentation is from Olivia, and her slides are on PDF, so I will shift the focus here. I think you can see that now. Olivia, tell us about your idea in Murray.
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay? Sometimes my mic is a little weird. I'm seeing thumbs up. Okay, so my idea here is for pedestrian improvements in Murray. I'm Olivia. I graduated from the bachelor program here in, I think, 2016. And now I do some consulting planning. So I'm excited to be in this class. Next slide. So here's my project area in Murray, Utah. If you're not familiar with the area, running on the left-hand side, north to south, is I-15, and on the bottom middle area is 215 running east-west. I moved to this neighborhood about 2 years ago, mostly because it was in an area. It was one of the only areas that I could afford to buy a house in that wasn't an endless sea of housing, pretty much. Next slide. So here is that same view, but I'm just pointing out a few key things that are in the area. You can see it's got a regional shopping center on the west side over there, Fashion Place Mall, lots of commercial running north to south, some commercial running along I-215. There's an elementary school within the boundary. And on the right/east side of the boundary is Wheeler Farm Regional Park, run by Salt Lake County, which is a great amenity for anyone who lives in the area. I love it. Next slide. Before I dive into the issues here, I kind of want to talk a little bit about who lives here, who lives in this neighborhood. So the people in this census tract, which is pretty much that square that I showed, spends on average 22% of their income on transportation, which is, you know, it's about average for the Salt Lake area. It's a little bit lower than the greater MPO, Wasatch Front Regional Council, who tend to spend about 49% on housing and transportation combined, where this area spends 45%. But only about half of the households in the city live within a 10-minute walk to a park, compared to about 70 in Draper and 60% in Bountiful, some nearby comparable cities. Next slide. Okay, and lastly, I wanted to give a little snapshot of who lives in the area. What's the demographic like? So you can kind of see the neighborhood drawn in the top left corner. I think the key stats here are that at-risk population list shows households with disability, population over 65, and households with no car. I'd also like to add into that list, for the purposes of my presentation, that chart on the bottom left, population under 18. Like Christy mentioned a little earlier, seniors, no vehicle households, it's hard for them to get around. It's hard for those people to access education, jobs, recreation, any of those things. Sorry, I've got a sneeze in my nose. I've got allergies kicking in very early this year, earlier and earlier. So these demographic groups, young kids, maybe a retired population, populations with no car, households with disabilities, they live in a great location to access some of the important amenities that I showed in my previous maps. On my street alone, I know of at least 4 households with residents over 65 that don't always have access to cars. Maybe one of them in the household can drive and one can't. And 2 families that have young kids. All 6 of these households have had scary close calls, trying to find their way to nearby city amenities on foot.
So
Next
I know this is amazing, but you're at 5 minutes now. So
Okay, all right. I'll go through a little quicker. So current conditions, we can go to the next slide here. I moved to this neighborhood with dreams of Sunday walks to get boba tea at the mall and adventures at Wheeler Farm. As a new mom, household with a little baby, it's a little scary to cross some of these roads. So you can see here, this is a map of existing active transportation, not much in the project area. Next slide. Here is kind of just a Strava map who uses these roads. You can see the perimeters of the neighborhood are well used. Next slide again is just another background heat map of car crashes. Again, all of those access points to these amenities are really high points for crashes. Not very safe. So next slide, I wanted to point out what the city is planning. Murray just did their 2019 transportation plan, which unfortunately I didn't participate in because I didn't live here quite yet. There's 2 projects in the area planned for about 2050, so pretty far out. It's a new sidewalk on that little green stem by number 47 and restriping bike lanes kind of through the middle of the neighborhood. So next slide, I just wanted to walk you guys through one more next slide. Some of the existing aerials. I had big ambitions of photoshopping these like a here's what it is now, here's what it could be. I had some big work stuff come up. So imagine with me. Here is the access point from my neighborhood on the top to Wheeler Farm on the bottom. You can see on that right side, thanks Christy, that there is one crosswalk and that's awesome. It actually has hawk lights as well. People don't slow down for them because it's 9th East in the suburbs and it kind of comes out of nowhere. So something I would like to have in there is a pedestrian island in the middle of this 5-lane road. Better signage saying, hey, this is a regional park and a dense neighborhood. Slow down. And another crosswalk on that other access point would be really cool. Next slide. Here is Fashion Place Mall. You can see my neighborhood on the right, Fashion Place Mall on the left. That access point in the middle is frequently used by a lot of my neighbors. There's always like little old ladies with their purses walking across this very scary road, no crosswalks in sight. And if you go to the next slide, you can actually see that there are sidewalks around the perimeter of the mall, but they don't even dip into the mall. They have all this beautiful landscaping, but not very safe. So that's my trouble with all these great amenities that are not very accessible. So my last slide, if you'll go one more, here's some of my solutions and the barriers. I talked about solutions already, so in the name of time, we won't go through them. Some of the barriers to accomplishing this are, one that's not listed is the city just did their transportation plan. And those items are not listed in it, unfortunately. Another one is UDOT owned right-of-way can be a serious challenge, including coordination between city, state, county, and private property owners with stakes in parking, right-of-way, all of these things. Funding is a big issue. If any of you saw on my slide showing planned projects, they were pretty pricey just to add a sidewalk and restripe bike lanes. funding's always an issue. And of course, loss of our precious parking space, taking up space for people who want to walk to the mall or around the mall. And that is my conclusion.
Yay. Excellent, excellent. Tom, what do you have to offer for Olivia? What's her next step, so to speak?
Oh yeah, good question. I had a student that had a very similar project to yours last semester. They were focusing on that 900 East side of the neighborhood.
Oh yeah,
and getting connections into Wheeler Farm, and it was really awesome. I recommended that she talk to the city of Murray and to UDOT's Region 2, and I think I would also encourage you to do that as well. If you would like, I can give you a couple of contacts. Just put your email in the chat and I'll send that to you. But I think that it's a great idea, and obviously this huge missing link between, the reason why you moved there, between these destinations that you want to go to and that are very family oriented, but that you can't access without getting in your car, even though it's only a couple of blocks away. So I think it's amazing, and you really focused on the right benefits and the right people, and that was awesome.
Thank you. It's the age-old issue of the suburbs. So
yeah.
Why build a sidewalk? Nobody walks there.
It's a chicken and egg issue.
Right.
Don't walk
Good
here
job,
because there's
Olivia.
no sidewalks.
Great. Well, we're going to shift to some similar issues on a different context and a different scale with Lucas. You're going to talk about, I had to look this up. I was like State Route 269. Where's State Route 269? I think we know it as 5th and 6th South. I believe that is State Route 269. Am I correct on this? Are you with us, Lucas? Oh, maybe we've got a missing person here. Okay, well, let's pivot quickly. I thought I saw Lucas earlier, so we will, because we have some time here. Let's, Alec, are you ready to go with your presentation here? I can get your slides up here quick.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, so let me get that all set. Good. Oh, and in Lucas's defense, I now recall he had I'm just remembering now, he had a work meeting. He'll be joining us late, so we'll catch up with him later. That's my bad. Oops. There we go. Take it away.
Cool. My name is Alec, and I live right near 7th East and 2nd South, and my presentation is on crossing the street. Go to the next slide. So there are a lot of reasons that one would cross 7th East at 2nd South, and it appears to be that the city wants us to cross 7th East at 2nd South. So it's mostly residential east of 7th, and it's mostly commercial west of 7th. And there's quite a few amenities and places of work, grocery stores, cafes, schools, all that is west of 7th East. But all of our housing is on the right of 7th East. There's plenty of mixed density housing, as well as single family homes a little bit further up, larger apartment buildings and such. So for a lot of people, it's actually quite convenient to live in this neighborhood because all you have to do is cross the street. Or is it? So there's a lot of issues with 7th East, and this is the main one right here. With our little graphic, you see it's not too fun. Cars taking a left turn onto 7th East from 2nd South usually don't see pedestrians walking across the street. It also goes the other way around for pedestrians moving east instead of west. So pretty bad situation here. And if you want to go to the next slide, I can show you what that looks like. This is me walking, and then there's these people coming at me. And if you go to the next slide, here's another fun one. And if there was audio, you'd hear the rush and roar of traffic. And people just really don't care. They just speed right along, you know, get within 6 inches of you. And there's one more, which has quite shaky video because I was shaking with rage from the previous encounter. And then I had the mother of all encounters, where this truck coming from a straight lane just started turning right at me. So really not fun. I just want to go home and cook dinner, get back from work, and here I am risking my life. And so I was like, hey, I'm probably just a crazy guy on the street. Who else is crossing the street? And if you want to go to the next slide here, I did a little survey. I stood at that exact intersection and I asked people, how often do they cross the street? And how often do they feel unsafe to cross the street? And I didn't get too many. I got like, I want to say 15 or so people that entertained me for a couple of minutes talking about the street. But the very large majority of them had some serious qualms with crossing the street at 7th East and 2nd South. And they very specifically said that cars making a left turn onto 7th East were often the cause of their concerns there. So if we want to go to the next slide, I kind of just wanted to cut to the chase and look to see how we can fix it. So I looked to the FTA for some examples. This is from their, let's see, I want to say it's like uncontrolled crossing mapping here. So it technically doesn't apply to this specific intersection, but I think we can take some good lessons. So they recommend 3, 6, and 9 as some key solutions for this intersection. And we know that because our average, I think it's vehicle AADT stands for annual average daily traffic. So that's how many people are going across 2nd South and 7th East every day. And from 2019, that is about 28,000 on average per day. So 28,000 vehicles are going through that intersection on average per day. And, you know, despite it technically not being 40 miles an hour, it may as well be 40 miles an hour since it's a state highway all the way up until 4th South. And I don't believe there's any speed limit signs saying otherwise. So I just kind of assumed it's 40 miles an hour. It may be something different officially, but that's, you know, besides the point. Anyways, I just want to highlight some solutions that we could potentially look at. So the first one is have some advanced yield here to or stop here for pedestrian signage. There's not a whole lot of signage on 7th East. It's pretty bare. And if there is signage, most people are driving so fast that they're not even paying attention. And then a pedestrian refuge island. There's kind of a median on 7th East. It's like the 6-inch raised median that most people just kind of take their large Jeeps and drive over it. So it doesn't really do anything. And maybe we could like have an actual pedestrian refuge island there instead of the teeny little bump. And then the next thing is a pedestrian hybrid beacon, which doesn't necessarily make as much sense here, but potentially just adding more, adding more signage in general is probably better for this area. But honestly, in my opinion, the best thing we can do is just make it so that if there is a pedestrian crossing the street, the left turn light is red, not blinking yellow. And I think that would solve the majority of our solutions here. And that's probably the cheapest option too, although I don't know how expensive it is to change a light timer. I'd assume that's probably a little bit cheaper than building a refuge island. But, you know, things like a road diet, I have very little hope of happening given that it's 7th East. So we won't even talk about that one. But that would be obviously my preferred option there. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Alec. I know that intersection well, and I've got sweaty palms from watching your videos. That makes me very nervous, just, empathizing with your situation. So Councilmember Valdemoros, this is your district.
Yeah, it's in my district. So I walk that intersection when I wasn't in a planner. I used to live on 7th South and 3rd, sorry, 7th East and 3rd South. So I used to go to that corner quite often. I didn't have a car when I was a student. So it hasn't changed, obviously. And that was 15, maybe 18 years ago. I don't know how much it costs for that light timer, but we have Tom here that he might know. And hey, budget season is coming up, Tom. So you can always put a request, that we do that. The council is interested in, in reducing speed limits in general in our city because of this very reason. Obviously, this is, you mentioned that this is not a city street. But regardless, whatever we can do, I'm happy to lobby the rest of my council members to support something like this because, yeah, that intersection is tough. Oh, and also I think there's a lot of elderly people that live in that area because of those apartments. So it would help.
And I actually asked people if they drove at all, and I got about like 30 to 40% of my results were people that didn't have a car or didn't drive. And a lot of them were students, but a lot of them were older people as well.
So Tom, I don't know if you have a number that you're familiar with, but that's my offer to you, Alec. Thank you for making it so simple and not simple, but thorough, but understandable. And it's an easy sell, at least for me.
Yeah, Alec, I'll put something in the chat for you.
Well, this brings to a close our first group of projects, and what an interesting bunch and what a wide range. And after we take our break, we'll have another 5 projects, so we'll need to keep them moving and keep our presentations to time. And I will be even more strict about it after the break because I'm going to go get some more coffee, and that'll get me all cranky. So let's go ahead and take our break. We normally take a 10-minute break, and I have 6:55 here. So let's regather at 7:05, and we will start after break with Anna and more video and more scary video. So if you've got a weak heart, this is a little bit of a warning. So let's gather back again at 7:05. Have a good break. I'll see you in a bit. Wiping food off of their faces in some cases. Gigi's got a refill on his drink there. That's good. Lucas, you're here. I'd forgotten your schedule tonight. I had you up earlier in the evening, and then where is he? He's like, he told me, I forgot. So glad you're here. We'll get you in. Let's see, maybe after Anna. Anna's going to lead us off here on the second half, and then we'll filter you in after that, and then move on to Brian, Austin, and then the Glendale Transportation Group. We'll close with the group. How does that sound with everyone? Great. Well, welcome back. This is the second half of tonight's presentations, and let's get Anna's slides up here. There's that. Click here, and this is you, isn't it? If I got the right slides?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, good.
Yep, same color scheme as Alec. All right. Hi, my name is Anna. I worked on a project that addresses transit accessibility for pedestrians along 3300 South. Next slide, please. Buses make destinations accessible for everyone. As many of my classmates have mentioned, accessible transportation provides access to really basic necessities. I chose to focus on 3300 South in particular because besides living near it, it has really poor ADA accessibility. Mill Creek residents have expressed that they would like better active transportation and transit options. It has pretty high usage on that bus route that goes along 3300 South. It's UTA Route 33. In February, there were 870 individuals who boarded UTA Route 33. And then the road also provides access to mixed use land, so it has really desirable destinations. Next slide, please. All right, this is a map of the bus route. It goes from 300 West, the track station at 300 West, to Wasatch Boulevard. This is a picture of one of the bus stops along this route. Next slide. And these videos, you can go ahead and play them. This first one, oh, okay. The second one shows me walking east away from the bus stop. There's no separation from a lane of traffic. I promise I did not stop in the middle of the road. This one shows me walking towards the bus stop. Both show really good examples of how inaccessible this location actually is. And this is a pretty extreme example. Not all the stops are like this along 3300 South, but it just shows that this is not ADA accessible. It's not accessible for people with strollers. It's not even accessible for individuals who are uncomfortable with that low level of separation from traffic. Next slide, please. So Mill Creek has a couple of master plans that actually address wanting to have better connections for all modes of transportation. They have the city center master plan, their general plan, and the transportation plan. Even though they address a desire to want to support all modes of transportation, the only strategy that they really put forward is bus stop amenities, such as seating and lighting, which is valuable, but it doesn't actually get individuals to the bus stop safely. Next slide, please. Using a couple of recommendations based off of the Life on State project, UTA, WFRC's connectivity guide, and various other resources, I came up with a couple of strategies that would work really well in this area. Mid-block crossings with the hawk beacons. Those are the ones, like Olivia mentioned, that stop traffic in each direction. Pass-throughs, these are essentially pedestrian walkways through neighborhoods that shorten the connections to get to destinations. Wayfinding signage, curb extensions, that's a picture on the lower right hand. It is a strategy to slow down traffic, and it also decreases the distance that individuals need to walk to actually cross the road. Complete sidewalks, street lighting, and curb ramps, which are not only good for ADA accessibility, but they're also really helpful for really any wheel device. Next slide, please. One of the spots that could use one of these recommendations is the Smiths on 3300 South. There's a bus stop located right next to the McDonald's. You can kind of see in that picture on the right-hand side. And there is an existing crosswalk from the neighborhood on the south side to get up into that commercial area that's really heavily used. There's an REI there, but there's no crosswalk to get from where the existing crosswalk drops you off to the actual bus stop itself. This is also an area that has fairly high usage. In February of just this past year, there were 22 individuals that boarded at this location and eight individuals who left. So not only do they have no place to go at once they get off, they don't really have access to those businesses. So I would also recommend putting in a pedestrian pathway, even if it's just like a colored pavement type pathway to get to Smith's and those other commercial businesses. Next slide, please. Another example is a spot along 3300 South that doesn't have a sidewalk. And that's probably shown with the really low February usage. There were 0 individuals who boarded in February and January, and 1 individual alighted at this location, which is really interesting because it's surrounded by a lot of neighborhoods. So next slide. My recommendations would be to put in a sidewalk and multi-use path just for, in general, safety, obviously. Also a cut through, kind of hard to see, but in that picture on the right-hand side through the north neighborhood, a cut through would just provide faster access to 3300 South. And then also a mid-block crossing. There are existing crosswalks on 3300 South that are about a half mile apart. So if an individual is in the south side of the neighborhood and wants to board on the north side so that they can head west, essentially they would have to walk a half mile if they want to get across the road safely. Next slide, please. All right, so my proposal for strategies are and next steps would be for Mill Creek to add network connectivity tools to their master plans in a way that addresses that they're actually going to move forward with them. There's also further research that's needed on pedestrian movement in Mill Creek so that we can have a better understanding of which areas are high usage and where people are going and where they're actually coming from so that we can support the infrastructure for that. And then finally, to actually implement, plan, and design policies throughout the city to be included in future projects. And that's everything.
Fantastic. Wow. And it makes me so, I don't know, angry sometimes, you know, imagining what it's like to be there as a human being as opposed to something in a vehicle. So,
yeah.
GJ, this is kind of your turf. What can we do to help Anna get her and her neighbors to the number 33 bus?
Okay, so let me finish my notes on the group here. It was amazing. Anna, this is actually an active project. We have funding. We have federal funding for this to improve the corridor from the track station to Wasatch Boulevard. I don't know if you saw my other note there, but Laura Hansen happens to live just a little bit further east from the Wasatch Boulevard end of things, and her daughter walks across the freeway down to the McDonald's and has had, you know, personal experiences with this particular area. But I will, if you reach out to me, I will personally put you in touch with some of the people that are doing the work along this corridor. Luckily for us, they're all city-owned streets, so they do have a lot of latitude, but property rights are pretty big deal, and some of the slides you showed reflect that, right? Where, you know, I'm going to put my fence right up against the traffic, and those are tough conversations to have. But everything you presented was 100% dead on. What we're trying to do, just as a side note, is to really make, I don't know how many of you have ridden the 35. It used to be called the Max, but the 35 from the Mill Creek station to Magna. But we're trying to link those two. So that you nailed it. Those are two of our highest performing routes in the system. They're just kind of bread and butter routes for a lot of people that just need to get to their jobs. And we want to make that a 15-minute service from Magna to the Wasatch Boulevard. So it's, yeah, we're in the early stages. We have people out looking at potential sites for some stations on the east side. But yeah, happy to help you. I can't offer any more than you presented. You nailed it.
Thanks.
I love it when we have our presenters who say, yeah, that's next on our agenda. We're actually doing that. That's up for construction this next season. So that is fantastic. And we didn't engineer that. This was, you know, authentic, just coincidence. So thank you very much. Well, Lucas, you are with us now, and we're going to switch to your slides, and again, switch geographies here, but it's not dissimilar issues. There's some overlap here with what Anna just presented. I think you'll see. As I was saying to the group before, I had to look up what SR 269 was. I wasn't really sure. Where is SR 269? I think it goes by some other names, but at any rate, these are your slides. Go ahead and take it away.
All right, thanks, Keith. Hey everyone, I'm Lucas, for those of you who I haven't met, and my presentation is on reimagining SR 269, as Keith alluded to, also known as 500 South and 600 South, or Cesar E. Chavez Boulevard and Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. Next slide, please. So the two of these streets combined are kind of a highway to funnel traffic in and out of downtown onto and off of I-15. They're 120 feet wide and 6 lanes of traffic wide in some places. They're really, really efficient and good at getting hundreds and thousands of cars onto and off of the freeway, but they're really horrific for just about everyone else. Next slide, please. So here's a map of where you can see 500 South and 600 South kind of cutting all the way across the city. And they really serve as a kind of psychological and physical barrier to the city, in between blocking up downtown and these kind of residential neighborhoods to the south. So it really kind of erodes the walkability of our city and prevents people from living in neighborhoods like Central Ninth, Ballpark, and Liberty Wells from being able to safely and comfortably walk or bike to and from downtown. Next slide, please. So wouldn't it be great if this looked more like, next slide, this? So how do we get there? Next slide. So I'm proposing that we dig out a trench where the streets are now and lower the cars below grade. And at grade level, put linear parks down the middle of the streets with really calm single lane traffic kind of flanking the sides of the parks. Next slide, please. This is not super unusual or unthought of. Here's an example in Reno, Nevada, where they did the same thing to rail lines that cut through their downtown. So you can see they just dug out a trench where the rail lines were and lowered the rail line down, and now they have a park going through their downtown instead of rail lines. This also isn't unlike the proposal for the rail yard behind the Rio Grande station. And it's comparable to other things, like I think someone mentioned SLC's Big Dig. It's similar to Boston's Big Dig. This isn't the first time this would happen. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a little indication of how it might happen with on-ramps and off-ramps every 2 blocks. So you can see the red lines there are off-ramps bringing cars up from underground to the cross streets, and then those blue lines are the ramps going back down underground. So if you do have to travel for 1 block at grade level, it's only 1 block on those kind of slow moving side streets. Next slide, please. This isn't super unusual even for Salt Lake City. You can see there's a lot of parking garages downtown that have similar on and off ramps into the parking garages that don't really take up more than a single lane of traffic. So it wouldn't have to have a huge footprint next to these parks. Next slide. Like I mentioned earlier, these streets are titled Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard and Cesar Chavez Boulevard. By turning them into these long greenways, it's just an opportunity to better honor these leaders and instill, public art and events and things to honor them better as well. Well, better than streets no one ever walks down. Next slide, please. So often we think of active transportation projects as kind of opposed to cars, but this one would be even better for cars. Cars wouldn't be stopped by traffic every block, traffic lights every block. They could flow freely underground, unbeknownst to the world above. And this is something that UDOT really does have to consider, because as Salt Lake grows, they're going to have to figure out a way for these streets to work even more efficiently than they already do. If you've ever tried to get onto I-15 at 5 or 6 p.m. at 500 South is already getting blocked up light to light. And so this is a worthwhile project simply from a traffic standpoint. Next slide. And also for everybody else. Next slide. I do just want to say that this is the exact kind of project that would drive gentrification of the area. And I don't think that it's a reason that the city shouldn't pursue it, but I think from the very get-go, the city needs to couple it with displacement mitigation projects and analyses And so I'm putting it in here now in the proposal. So it's a core value to the project from the very beginning. And last slide is just a nice photo. Thank you all.
Yay. That was a fantastic proposal. Wow. It's so, it's inspiring. I don't know how much it would cost us, but it might cost a little bit of money. Councilmember Voldemoros, is there, you said it was budget season. Can we put this into the,
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
the next budget?
Absolutely. I think I lobbied for it last week in DC, so you're in luck. That at least I went and well, all the council, but we talked about this project to our senators Romney and Lee, and then all of our other reps, as there is money available or coming to the States, as you know, somewhat of a recovery plan. And so there's been a lot of talks, like there's a lot of movement in these two intersections, this idea of grand boulevards, not necessarily, the undergrounding like you showed, but definitely the beautification of this area. So to make it really grand entrances and also more pedestrian friendly. Right now, like the off ramp on 600 South, we have so many accidents. I mean, even myself, we go down there so fast. If you're late at night and somebody's crossing, it's just tragic. So it's a big hole, I mean, in terms of funding, but it's not impossible. I think because of the energy that is going over there with the projects that are happening in Granary, I think those business owners are really involved and getting also the right ears at our state level and getting us also, us involved. And another thing that we have in our favor for this hopefully to happen is the Olympics. So if you guys remember, and probably Keith, you remember more than even I do because I arrived just right before the Olympics started. There was some sort of beautification on our entrances, and a lot of money went into it. So you kind of see the remnants, like some lighting on 4 South, on that exit, on that ramp, and other things that happened in preparations of the Olympics. And I think now that we want the Olympics back here, I think that's another huge point for the city to keep fighting for those dollars, to keep in Salt Lake City in those grand boulevards. That another undergrounding project that you may have seen in the news, it's that Rio Grande Station, on 5th West, that maybe we underground those huge rail lines on 600 West, and that's really not something that could happen anytime soon. but we do want to, at least me and other council members do want to lay the ground, whatever we're doing right now with the RDA property, so that hopefully in the future it can happen. And it has to do with this amazing idea, but also with equity with the east-west divide that exists right now because of 600 West. And so we want to connect all of the city and stop this east-west thing that it's real. All the 8 South is an issue with the trains, etc., etc. So there's a lot of energy in this area. So I appreciate this presentation. Another thing that students may not realize that it's so powerful is when you write emails to us. Write emails in support of whatever it is that you're doing, or any ideas that you have, because that helps us council members to understand that there is a wish, a hope, an interest in things. It is not just us, like we heard this would be a good idea, and hopefully there's community buy-in. But if we hear from you and we have those emails, it's like we can say, hey, our constituency is really interested in this, we want to make it happen. And then we can go talk to our lobbyists, we can lobby ourselves. Every time there's budget season, every time there's a legislature session, we can go in and go fight on behalf of you guys. So
well, thank you.
Thank you. That's great. What an excellent offer. And what a hopeful sign that there's so many possibilities happening in our city, and so it's great to see these creative forces actually developing into real things in our communities. So thank you. So Brian, we're gonna I think Brian's gonna take us back to 33rd South, because this is the street that everybody loves. Brian, are you going to narrate your slides? I noticed there was an audio track. Do you want to use the audio track, or do you want to do it live?
Yeah, we can just do the audio track and see if that works. And if
Okay,
not,
so
I'll cut into it.
I have clicked the shared sound box here, and we can see if this works.
So, right, this is looking west, going that same.
Let me back up here.
So,
come on.
It may be easier for me to narrate it. I don't know.
Yeah, why don't you just narrate it? If you
Okay.
don't mind.
All right, and I think so you want to start on. You just hit the next slide. I think it might. So,
oh, now you've got
oh,
two
it might
Brians.
not. This is my project. It's on 33rd South and approximately 1300 East.
Hold on. Let's try this again. Sorry about that.
It is a mixtape.
Yeah, it was. It was, it was kind of like a DJ. All right. So now I think this will work. And I'll hear it, but the rest of you won't. So go for it. Brian, live.
Okay, great. So my project was similar to a couple, hold on a second. Couple other projects was this particular section was the idea of putting in a better pedestrian access or better access to all vehicular modes, such as biking, walking, cars also. This picture is looking east on 33rd South on about 1300 East. It's looking right into Mill Creek's city center, where the new city hall was just broke ground last week. So if you go to the next slide, this is my, let's see, let's go one more right there. So this is my project name. I called it Dreamland because this would be an ideal situation where you would have 6-foot bike lanes on each side, protected bike lanes on each side, 6-foot sidewalks, and all the way down to 10-foot wide travel lanes in each direction with no turning lane in the middle. I know this kind of would give some engineers heartache, but this is just kind of an idea that I had, trying to make that city center more of a viable area to really make it, instead of really make it a city center that's walkable and accessible to all users. We can go to the next slide. I know it can be done. I've looked at UDOT's cross section of traffic lanes and their width. It does say that you can get it down to 10 feet right there. I see it on the right hand side. This is the lane width on a local access road. So they don't put a lot of literature or narration on it. But anyways, about a 10-foot road. But you go to, I know it can be done. Again, back down to my dream, just kind of my ideas of in that area. I got the idea from a presentation that was kind of shown to me. Here you have your wide open 3-car lanes in each direction, sidewalk, meandering sidewalk that goes off to nowhere, your utility corridor with green. But I thought maybe some spearheading of the grand boulevards like this, where you'd put some trees down the middle, median, possibly then throw in some people, sidewalk, make it a little more, as I think pretty much explains itself. Uh, so I think that's back to it. This is just, again, just showing existing conditions. So which we prefer. It kind of ties into pretty much everywhere else. So it said where to next would be kind of me to do more homework on this idea, this project. I've discussed this with some some engineering firms. They were not too happy about 10-foot travel lanes. They were not wondering about all the utilities and all that utilities on the side of the roads. But this would be my next potential step, would be what kind of plans already exist. I know there's an existing Mill Creek plan, transportation plan that was mentioned earlier. Anna, I believe, mentioned it. Meet with some local plan engineers. I know the Mill Creek Center plan calls for a boulevard here. You have it on your left-hand side. And I'm, again, it's just kind of like throwing ideas on the wall and see if they kind of stick onto what this my transportation idea would work for, and where I go to next.
Wow. Brian, the visuals on this were so compelling. You tell a really great story. It's a very attractive set of ideas. Tom, what are your thoughts about this proposal?
Well, if anybody tells you that you can't do 10-foot lanes, just point them to the Federal Highways Administration guidance that says 10-foot lanes are fine. Anything larger than an 11-foot lane is not fine. I think that there's a lot of, I think engineering and planning are very dogmatic professions, and we hear something once and we think it's the law and we think it's truth, and we don't take the time to read up on things that have been said since then. So you definitely have backing from the federal government on that. And I think everything else was fantastic. I mean, similar to the last presentation that I commented on, the land use, I think, is your biggest help in getting this done, because it is really supportive of types of street design that you came up with. So good job.
Fantastic. So we're going to shift again, this time to a different geography once more. This one is taking us out to the woods. So Austin, you are next up on this.
All right.
Yeah, let me get your slides up in front of us. Oops, jumped ahead. There we go.
Sweet. So I did my project on transit trails. Salt Lake City's trail access is unlike any others, but unfortunately you still need a car to access most of our trails, which is a real shame. So next slide. So for this, I focused on the foothills area of Salt Lake City. And then one more click in there. And so here you can see some of our foothills trails, not an exhaustive list whatsoever. And then the blue points are some common access points to access these trails. Trail access shouldn't be restricted to those of us that have a car, and trailhead parking is definitely an issue. If you'll get one more click in, and just another one too. So two common parking lots that come to mind are the I Street lot and the Popperton Park lot. Both fill up regularly and are super busy. And then one more click. Luckily, because we are so close to the trails in Salt Lake City, we have bus stops that just happen to be close to trailheads because of mostly the Capitol and the hospital. So we have an existing some stops that we can use, but they're not well advertised as transit trail stops, and they're still pretty far away from a walking point of view. So next slide. So the two stops that I think are the most compelling as transit trail stops are the Capitol stop. You're within a half mile of Hell Canyon and Memory Grove. You're about a mile to City Creek. Unfortunately, that the 200 doesn't run all the way to the Capitol on the weekends, which is when most people might use it for trail service. And then the U of U hospital stop, it services tons of neighborhoods. It's got 3 high frequency routes that run up to it. You're less than a half mile to the Dry Creek Trailhead, and you can also access the Bonneville Shoreline Trail and Red Butte. But the wayfinding, especially with the construction going up by the hospital from the bus stop to the trailhead, is pretty intimidating and not great. So, and then the other thing I'll say is that accessing, if we'll do one more click, or maybe 2. Just 1 is good. So another cool thing I think is just about accessing trails by transit is you can do cool link ups and explore your trails in different ways. So these are 2 routes. That first one in the upper right is linking 2 stops on the 21 and exploring the foothills around Red Butte. And then the one on the bottom right is linking the Hogle Zoo lot all the way over to the 200. And just kind of, you couldn't do that in a car. And then, so my recommendations, next slide. So the small list, I kind of did it like immediate next step and the step after that. But the small list would be just to educate the public on existing access to foothills via transit. You can see a couple listicle articles that I found for other cities. Wayfinding, like from the stops so that you have signs telling you where the trails are in relation to the bus stops. And then a big thing I think is just maintaining weekday frequency and service on the weekends to service that recreational demand. A lot of our routes are still come off frequency, especially on Sundays. And then to the kind of next steps would be to add or formalize transit stops at trailheads. And then adding routes. I could see a route that could kind of service a lot of those access points to the foothills trails and then link that to Salt Lake Central Station or downtown or something like that. Oh, and then the additional routes that I think really make the most sense are ones that tie in with existing points of interest. It kind of blows my mind that we don't have service to Hogle Zoo, like all the way there, and Red Butte Gardens and the Natural History Museum. So that would kill 2 birds with 1 stone there. And then one more slide. So I limited this to just the foothills trails, but also, honestly, there's a ton of transit trails opportunities in the greater Salt Lake area. A couple of interesting tidbits here that I thought were interesting is there are like private shuttle companies that run up to Guardsman Pass. They fill up like days in advance for $15 a head. So there is a crazy amount of demand here already. Interesting just reading about other transit to trails programs is they often have diverse funding sources and aren't always affiliated with the local transit system. Seattle's Trailhead Direct receives contributions from REI as an example. And then Park City has a pilot program that's not affiliated with UTA. It's a partnership with a bunch of different organizations and has funding from the Central Wasatch Commission. And then another example of a private transit to trails is the Wasatch Backcountry Alliance in partnership with backcountry.com and Utah Mountain Shuttle. After Alta changed their parking policies, they started running an early morning shuttle for backcountry skiing. And then there's a federal money there's a bill that would free up a lot of federal money to fund this kind of work. And then my Beyond the Foothills recommendations are there on the right as kind of more of just a brainstorm. So yeah, that's what I've got. Maybe I'll have a listicle out here in the next couple months about my favorite trails to access by transit, but for now, yeah, we're so close yet so far was kind of my takeaway.
This is such an exciting project, and it's such an obvious thing for us to do, right? I mean, this is one of the things that is Salt Lake City's, Salt Lake region's draw. I mean, for those people who move here, we came here, some of us, because we had easy access to, to the natural environment. So this is such a kind of a no-brainer. Oh, good. Julianne, I'm glad you're here. Julianne Cebula, as you know, was one of our presenters earlier, and she's been with us this evening. And Julianne, I'm glad you can comment on this because the work that the city has done on wayfinding, improving wayfinding for transit services has really changed how we experience transit in Salt Lake City. And I'm wondering if some of those ideas might work here to help launch Austin's idea.
Yeah, so wayfinding is something that in particular Dan in our offices has long worked on. And we have looked at doing kind of more comprehensive wayfinding so that it's not just one thing or another, parking or transit or trails, but it's more comprehensive. And boy, it's just, there's so many priorities that we haven't really been able to get a comprehensive plan for that. But in terms of transit to trails, I love that. I just love the whole concept. This was a really good presentation. And it's, I think, something that in some ways COVID could make more viable because we're seeing a lot more weekend trips on transit. And so, for example, Saturdays, and you may have seen this with the free fare February, that there was a pretty big bump in weekend transit trips during that time. So I think that there's a lot of possibility in that. But I think it will take a transition culturally as well to think about recreation as something that you can do without having an SUV with you while you do it. So, it always cracked me up. Like, I think, especially when I first moved to Utah, to see people with like bikes strapped to a car. And I thought, well, why don't you just take the bike where you're going? Sometimes it's a really long way and you can't do that, right? But anyway, it's, I think, something that if there was enough of a cultural shift, that could become really viable. We just need enough people doing it. That's what makes transit work, is enough people doing it. But it's super cool. What a great idea.
That's fun. I love it. So our last presentation, here it is, it's coming. This is a presentation by a group, and I'll let them introduce themselves. I know them as the Glendale Transportation Group, but maybe they've rebranded since the last time I spoke with them. And here are their slides. And take it away, group.
Okay, so definitely like no rebranding, but I'm happy to let Turner and Rosa introduce themselves. I'm going to be doing most of the talking here. My name's Paulo. Hello. So Turner, Rosa, if you guys want to go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rosa. Thanks, Paulo, for the introduction. And yeah, we're still the Glendale group.
I'm Turner Benton, also with the group.
So cool. All right, I think we can hit next. See, this is the moment where I wish I could like tap into the memory bank and like do like one of those jokes that Reed Ewing does to kind of like get everyone like awake again. But thanks for sticking through. So I think I have this listed as an issue. I think a better way to think about this is sort of like the frame, how we're trying to like frame this. And it's just acknowledging that there's a city need and a community need and just desire from communities on both like east and west side to address transportation and acknowledge that transportation impacts equity and quality of life through the lenses of economic development, air quality, community health, et cetera, et cetera. So our project is to essentially enhance transportation by proposing a transportation committee that would serve as a platform between like city departments and community residents as it relates to Glendale and Poplar Grove neighborhoods. And this committee would be tasked with understanding and learning transportation barriers based on like past research and whatever we can find now. And the reason this group came about is we are all, Turner and Rosa, myself, are all pretty integrated into the community. We all live on the west side, and there's some really good resources and people that we can tap into. So hopefully structuring something to start addressing these issues is kind of like that first step in that direction. So next slide. So committee is a big task, and we acknowledge that. But we do have some long-term goals that we like want to achieve on that 1 to 10 year horizon. And one of them is encouraging city council. So to the likes of Anna and Ali and Darren, all the great people representing us to fund and implement the Livable Streets program. There's a lot of research and data that backs the need up for like equitable transportation and planning processes as it relates to West Side communities. And what do I have here for the first one? Yeah, basically what I said before, being that platform and kind of like helping city departments tap into what has historically been like a very hard, like getting to the like marginalized group, the linguistic isolated groups of the West Side, and sort of just having the platform for that trust building that I think is still lacking, to be frank. Next slide. So long-term goals, but I think in the short term, there's some achievable things that we want to go for. So as of now, we have a internship that we identified for a transportation intern that we'll be reaching out to the University of Utah for, kind of like help the group kind of like carry out some of these ideas throughout the course of this next year. And that's something that we already have that Turner and I are drafting to send out to the chair of the planning program. Tomorrow at 5 o'clock, we're submitting an AARP grant to lock in $5,000 to pay the intern, because that'd be nice. And there's a data-driven research aspect to this. So like whatever I'm an active transportation planner. It's what it's my day job. So whatever I can kind of provide pro bono to this, and whatever resources we can tap into is sort of that aspect there. But as far as like a proposed project, we have identified an intersection, Glendale Drive and Navajo Street, to propose some traffic calming. Turner has talked to John Larson with the transportation department to kind of like understand some of the pros, cons, barriers, constraints, opportunities there. So more to come there. Another short-term goal is get an opinion piece in our local newspapers and kind of like have call to action. And before we go to the next slide, these next series of maps we made to kind of like show some of like what we've already started with the research data-driven aspect of this. So go ahead to the next slide. We can go over this one quick. This is just an existing inventory, an existing pedestrian infrastructure inventory of the Glendale neighborhood. So everything in your turquoise is complete sidewalks on both sides of the street. So essentially here we're just measuring like all ped infrastructure, absence and presence of sidewalk. This is one aspect, like one portion that would make it into like another analysis called the level of traffic stress analysis for both bike and pedestrians. This is the first step in that. It's a pretty time intensive process, but here's like here's the first start to that. Next slide. There's equity focus areas that WFRC and Salt Lake City has identified. WFRC, the way they create their composite scores, they look at 3 variables: low income, minority, they have the minority index, and 0 car households. And there's a West Side equity master plan that I'm actually just going to share here in the link in the chat with all of you. You guys can all take a look at that. They take it a step further. They look at the minority index, people living below the poverty level. They look at linguistic isolation as a variable, households without vehicles, and people over the age of 65 and under the age of 18, and people with disabilities.
So Paulo,
yeah.
you're at 5 minutes. So let's wrap it up.
Great. I looked at 12 variables. Here's a composite score of that, including tree canopy, people who are likely to get coronary heart disease. It's all added in there. Happy to share the methodology here. If you go to the next slide, I ran a composite score again just for Salt Lake City. And essentially here, the darker the color, the higher the need to address some of the equity issues that are happening here. So pretty self-explanatory there on the west side. And if we can kind of like just fly through these next ones, I took some crash data from UDOT, so we can just kind of fly through these. This is the city level, this is Glendale. The next one is the actual intersection we're looking at, Glendale Drive and Navajo Street. And if we can just fly through all of these. So we don't have like a proposed design for this, but there are some potential treatments ranging from $100 to up to like $50,000 and what it would cost to like implement some solutions here. That are just taken straight out of the Livable Streets document that Salt Lake has on their website. We could go to the next slide here. Some other alternatives here. We can just keep going here. The one thing we do want to achieve with this is we want to paint a mural close to like what the spin space would be, but we also want to kind of bring on help, like engineers, whoever could help us with this effort. I have one committed from Perrin Pierce to kind of like understand what the vertical elements would be and kind of like what the actual cross sections and what changes would have to be done here. But in terms of next steps, that's kind of it, like identifying one solution that's like low risk, low cost, but potentially high reward, and show it as a prototype that it does work. And some of these communities that need more. All right, I'll shut up.
Bravo. Excellent presentation. And we spent some time over the past few weeks talking about how to conceptualize moving from a variety of different scales. And so to be very specific and very detail oriented, but also to show that detail in a broader context and how it connects to a wider neighborhood and a wider community, and you guys have done that really just beautifully. So excellent job. Council Member Valdemoros, what do you think?
Yeah,
Glendale Transportation Group.
I think overall it's amazing. I wanted to say a few words for this last group. I think Juliana, let me see what I'm thinking that, we created the Equity in Policing board as a result of the issues that we faced in 2020. And I think it's picked up with the rest of the council members about equity, but not just racial equity in that case and in policing, but also physical equity and transportation equity. And I think it's resonating more and more and more with council members that are not in the West Side. And so I would love to suggest to the mayor that we, in her group that does equity, that we have a transportation one. Like the one that you formed, because that can also drive a lot of our decisions when we're talking about there's barriers, right? East and West, when we look at the redlining that has happened historically, but with this really like this transportation aspect that it's so obvious, to us, the planners, the nerds, but it might not be as obvious to others. So that's one thing that I would love for this group to pitch in, and please reach out to me. I put my email in there in the chat so that I can also send it to Ale and Victoria. I'm sure they're going to be excited about this, and and Darren Mano as well, as a planner and architect. I think as long as we have 4, I think we can. You always remember, we need 4 to push for certain things and vote on things, and hopefully the mayor will accept, to add. I'm not sure if you or anybody else that is interested in equity in transportation. So I think it was a great presentation. Overall, I'm impressed with all of the work. Oh my goodness, how amazing. Obviously, you have a great instructor here that does so much good to the city and has been doing so much. And obviously this shows because these are very tangible, understandable, things are everyday things that we understand that, it's an issue, and that we can find some solutions that are not impossible I think things have changed in the politics. I think the last few years, you have a council that is very diverse now. We are majority minority that look at this with a very different perspectives and what's been traditionally thought of as we develop our city. So you have a lot of allies. Is that the word, allies? Yeah, like allies with us, with council members that understand these equity issues and in all regards, disability, racial, social, etc. So good. I mean, kudos to you guys. Don't forget to email us. Don't forget to share your thoughts about things that are happening in Salt Lake City that you would like to see change, so that we can use that when we debate on things. So,
well, thank you so much, Councilmember Valdemoros, and to all of our respondents, to Tom and GJ and Julianne. Thank you for a great set of projects, students. Again, 2 nights in a row of just amazing, creative, insightful, very diverse projects that on things that matter to you. And I think that's what comes through every one of these projects, is these are things that you care about. And that shines through every project and all your work. And you can see how you think about your communities and how you think about ways to make them better. That's what we're trying to do with this class. And I'm so hopeful and rewarded by what I see from you. So thank you for making my day better, a lot better. So, okay, and we are at time. Amazing. We are on time. And by the way, we are on budget too. At least that's what I'm told from my my budget officer. So all's good in the world. A week from tonight, we meet a little early. We're at 5:30, and we are on the east side steps to City Hall. And if you have any questions about that, please, or about that or anything else, please email me, and we will get everything right with the world, at least by next Monday. Maybe not right away, but by next Monday, all will be right. Good. All right. Well, until next Monday, see you with, real clothes. I'm gonna have to put on real pants. I've been wearing sweatpants this whole time. You're saying, okay, TMI, that's enough. No more information about that. But we will be out in the world for all to see and glory in it. So take care, everyone. Until next week.
Take care.
Thank you.